set this up. All right, we're rolling. This is Freedom Phil. Like and subscribe. What am I talking about? I just want to talk about something I find interesting when it comes to ideas and how we propagate ideas in society and how it's just slowly, casually done to the point where nobody even really notices it. But if you go back and if you understand how to spot propaganda, and most people, when they hear the word propaganda, they have this negative connotation of it. But I kind of look at propaganda as just, hey, it's just sowing the seeds of ideas and trying to get as many people to think the way you want them to think for whatever reason, whatever agenda, whether good or bad. I don't really, the word is loaded because most of the time when you hear it, it has, if there's some past events that people could point to and say that was bad. But there were good things as well, like family values and other things that could be argued that you use propaganda to promote those. So, yeah, Freedom Phil, let's get into it. Hey, turn up the video speed. Why do I say that? Because you watch videos faster. Why wouldn't you? And as always, this is a channel for adults. If you want your kids watch anything on the internet, you're a shitty parent. I talk about all sorts of wild things, I swear, and I talk like I'm very blue collar. And don't blame me if they repeat some shit I say. Blame yourself for not knowing what your kids are watching. It's not our job to parent your kids. Yeah, let's get into it. I was thinking about this when I was watching like a handful of TV shows. Sometimes you could see like the overt, propaganda trying to get a goal, trying to edge society towards a certain direction. Like MASH, you could see back in the day the kind of Margaret Houlihan style feminism that eventually you would see, eventually, blooming more in the 80s. The dreams in the 40s or 50s becoming the seeds of the 60s, and then eventually on the TV shows. And I think TV shows are very much a product of the time, like the Hollywood of the time, like a good example of that. Look at how overt the sexuality was in like Star Trek, for instance, back in the day, the original Trek, and then look how much toned down it was in Next Generation. So Hollywood, the Hollywood of the time, the writers of the time. This is also why I've said for a while, I don't want the writers of the current era to do any remakes or continuations of things from the past because you motherfuckers just are bad writers at this point. There needs to be a house cleaning on that. But there's other examples like where you could say like women's movements, for instance, way back in the day to get women smoking, to get more people smoking, Torches of Freedom, look it up, where a bunch of women were walking down the street and lighting up cigarettes like they were marching, because they wanted to be able to smoke the same as men. By the way, propaganda and all that stuff, the manipulation of people, like saying you can't do this and then therefore people want to do it. It's funny to me. And then, it would be a bunch of rich women, by the way, for the most part doing it. And so on the heels of the rich follow the non-rich. You could also see this when you look at, say, I'm sorry to say this, but like black culture and the murder culture you see in black culture in America, where, the music, the TV, like the acceptance of what would otherwise be considered in a lot of other cultures fuck shit behavior. You also see this in redneck culture to some degree, but at least there's a little more family values. Like I would argue, sometimes I feel like country music was engineered to get white people to go to work and just passively accept, love their country, but passively pissed off and passively accept the taxes. As where the black culture was there to basically, I don't know, be self-destructive and give whitey something to be afraid of. I mean, let's be real about it. I mean, they're over there, you're over here. And the two mix when basically people get their shit together, I found, like people work jobs and whatnot. Next thing you know, you're working with normal people. But I just look at the music and I say, you can look back and you say at some certain point, when did the music start going a certain direction? You could argue rock music, in my opinion, was, yeah, good times, teenage, like underage, I should say underage pregnancies. Yeah, go back and listen to some of the music from back in the day and you will hear it, like she's only 17 or 16 or whatever. But yeah, just drugs, banging, and partying, which it actually really works out. Country music and rock music really works out together. So, I mean, you could say that rap music, for instance, is gang banging and banging and screwing, you know what I mean? But you look where the culture follows, and I kind of look at some of these things, like the greater ideas. Like where we were, for instance, on LGBT, when I was a kid, if someone was LGBT, they were getting their asses kicked by the local rednecks or whatever group you're from, because it was considered to be forbidden. And then slowly but surely, I guess enough people had kids that might have been a certain way, and inevitably, what ends up happening is that the winds of change start changing. But let's be honest, it didn't just change on its own. It could be argued that if you go back to like the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, like Roseanne, for instance, was one of the early shows I remember that had a gay not a gay actor, but I don't know if she was a gay or not, but like a gay character. When what was her friend's name, Nancy or something like that? Um, that a lesbian actor, and eventually the gay actor was introduced somewhat. Okay, and before that, if there were gay actors, it was totally comedic. But let's be honest, it's kind of like the thing with the black actors way back in the when the black actors were like back in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, they were kind of a joke. And then they got more serious, and of course, then you have the black underculture making their movies and their type of thing, and then the roles got more and more serious. So at first, the characters are introduced, but they're kind of a joke. But then down the road, they become more serious, and this is you could say the comedic, questionably ambiguous gay couple in the 70s, and not so much the 60s, but the 70s and the 80s led to where there was actually a normalized gay couple, to the point where if you watch that show Modern Family, that shows you that you just can see the massive difference. And it didn't get to there overnight. It took a lot of edging the public towards an acceptance of whatever you want. Religion is kind of similar but different in the sense that it's like if you didn't propagandize your children, like basically force them to believe in this invisible tooth fairy boogeyman of whatever God you believe in, you'd have to wonder if most people would ever even believe in God if they just look at it and go, like, so you're telling me this invisible man made everything and they have a magic tribe in the desert that they care so much about, but basically inflicts that tribe with a bunch of problems on a regular basis. Yeah. And you totally need to believe them. Totes believe them. And it's like nobody would go along with it if it wasn't for the fact that when they were kids, you beat them over the head with this crap. In fact, I know some people are like, oh, religion, Jesus is good. Okay, whatever. I don't care. But I'm kind of glad more people are atheists at this point. Like more parents were atheists and they were like, kids, if you want to believe it, go figure it out. But we're not going to force you to believe in the crap our parents drug us to. And you can kind of see like eventually, and by the way, when people start having a logical conversation about those sort of issues, you know, then people start looking at some of the ridiculous things and their ridiculous claims in their books and their religions and whatnot. And they're like, and the deprogramming starts. And the other thing is, it also becomes partially consensus on some certain types of propaganda, cultural movements, or thought. Like, for instance, I would say sometimes when you see the black people talking about the struggle, that is pseudo religious, the way people talk about it. But as people go out and they do their own, like you hear this occasionally from individuals that have escaped the hive mind of the black community, just like people that have escaped religion, where once they get away from something that doesn't work and they start doing for themselves, they'll be like, yeah, there's been problems here and there, but for the most part, most of the problems I ever dealt with were either my fault or someone that lived directly around me that was fucking up shit. And once enough people break out of the hive mind, the same thing with racism or ridiculous claims of religion or any sort of propagandic sort of thinking, once enough people break out of it and they're like, yeah, I noticed that too. What about this? And they start talking together. Then you're not the only one. And you could say it went kind of the other way with the gay community, where once enough people were like, they were out and they were proud and they were doing what they were doing. And by the way, I don't have a problem. Someone has to have a pride march. It's just, my rule is like this, just like with religion, just like with any sort of thing. Be respectful enough of other people to not ruffle your tail feathers in everybody else's face. It's one thing to be proud of what you are and what you believe. It's another thing to shove it in everybody's face, just like what religion used to do. And in fact, given the chance, I think religion would do it again. Just like I'm going to put this out. A lot of authoritarian nonsense comes to you from a bunch of people that otherwise would be weak, but gathered together, they gain strength. And so basically, it's this weird thing that as a society, and maybe it's became, I don't know if maybe we evolved, maybe we were created, I don't know. But it seems to me like we came from tribes of chimpanzees running around Africa at one point or wherever we started at. And then eventually it was tribes of humans running around. And it seems like, and there's always a charismatic head leader or something. And the more people that are with that person and doing well with that person, the better off they are. And therefore, it becomes our tribe and our thoughts versus your tribe and your thoughts. And we either convince you or destroy you. I think that's just the way people are geared. But it's weird when one of the things I think removes that whole like us versus them mentality when it comes to propaganda is the similarities that people have. Like when you can get away from the radical levels of thinking, and how much of radical thinking at times is quite literally just people who they don't really have much going on in their lives. I'm not trying to say that to be mean or cold or anything, but like they don't have enough going on, and then they take up like politics or religion or whatever, environmentalism, as a purpose, as a drive, as a fire in their belly, because we need that as people. Well, one thing that I find deprograms people from radical levels of thinking is that when you realize other people, if you take away the angry conversation between people, the propaganda and the programming, and it just becomes similarities. Oh, you like this? I like that. Or, oh, yeah, I got kids. Oh, you got kids? Oh, we want to live in a safe community. You want to live in a safe community. And if you realize your similarities, you have more similarities than you have differences. But when someone's identity, for instance, and I think social engineers like it this way, when your identity is not, for one, what you can actually do, what you can accomplish, or your family, your life, or your local community, your identity becomes red team, blue team, or my religion, your religion. Who is that really good for? Well, those that are selling you that, like for instance, with the religious people, it's our way or no way because the wackety woo in the sky told us this. And then, for instance, I've often said, I often think that a lot of conservatives, no offense, you guys, as long as it doesn't really affect you, it's like I got to be honest, a lot of conservatives remind me of like the boomer analogy. As long as it collapses after we're gone, what do I care? They'll claim to care about the taxes. They'll claim to care about America. But then when, rubber hits the road, they seem to like vote pretty pussied out for the most part. I mean, that's a lot of the reason, by the way, that for people that don't like Trump, that's why he got elected. Because a lot of conservatives were sick the fuck to death of the previous how many decades. Just like the black community has been getting sick and tired of Democrats making promises that they're never actually holding up to. So that's why, it's the dissatisfaction that's causing more people to walk away from whatever traditional parties they were with. It's like you've had this many years to get the job done. Now we're going to something else. And to some degree, that might even answer why a lot of people get as radical as they do, because they just want something to happen. So it's not surprising when someone can sow the seeds at one point and then eventually those seeds blossom into the movements you see today. I don't know. And it's just a closing thought that I've had off and on over the years is people are geared to worship something. I'm not saying that religion is necessary, but what I'm saying is without a God, they shall build a God because all they knew is how to worship. Most people aren't really about self-improvement. It's like an easy fix. Having a cause is an easier fix than fixing yourself. Like going out and working and saving your money, like not spending your money on ridiculous shit, to impress other people and, that dopamine rush, that takes some fortitude to some degree. Thought I heard the fox out there. But, yeah, no. I find the social engineering interesting. I do. I really do. I just watching the mechanics of it. That's the part I find interesting. And the numbers. And then when people, and the sad part is when people have been so thoroughly cooked, like brain rot cooked, that there's no level of facts or information that will convince them out of their positions because they believe. And belief is stronger than your facts, you know? And sometimes that's why, I've said, over the years, and I'll just close it with this. The greediest people I've ever met, and this is just a line I'm going to give, the greediest people I've ever met are not the rich. No, it's the poor. I know that surprises a lot of people, but think about it. How many people in America, for instance, have the option to go to a trade school, to go to a nursing school? There's all these ways they could advance themselves. You're poor, and yet you get subsidized, you get food, you get all this. And yet these people with all the options that people dream about in other countries have absolutely no motivation to do anything other than collect a check and continue to live. Now, I could understand if it was like somebody in a third world country where the warlord is basically now your leader and you really are in a fuck shit situation, but you're not. And there's something incredibly greedy with this idea of like, here, hey, you other person that's working, you need to pay more in taxes to feed my ass because I just don't feel like getting up. I have options and yet I do nothing with it. Now, the rich have tons of money, but to sit there and just ignore the greed of the average person, and then when you mathematically, like, you point out the choices that people choose not to make and the options that people choose not to access, no amount of logic or wisdom will convince people out of this idea. And by the way, if you want to be far more successful than I'll ever be, just tell people the lies. Just lie to them. Just smile. Listen to them, fillet their egos, make them feel really good, and give them the lies that they really want to hear. Because that's what works. But I find it, I find the whole process repugnant. Like, are we all to be just cheesy used car salesmen for each other? Where's the truth? Where's the reality? Most people would gladly take the poison. They'll know it'll be a lie, but they'll take the poison. They'll feed the people the poison. But I don't know. I can't really go for it. So anyways, that's my thoughts. Freedom Phil, like and subscribe. I'm going to go to bed. Peace.